Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Madam President. I move the foregoing recommendations in the Conference Committee report on House File 3 be now adopted and the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference Committee.
To that motion, Senator Pratt.
Madam President, essentially we have the same bill coming back as we voted off the Senate floor. Just a couple of quick notes that I'd like to highlight. There is no rulemaking in the bill. That was the Senate provision. We also adopted the Senate language for firearms data privacy. We did adopt a House suggestion which adjusted the early reissue language to extend the expiration dates when people are going in to get a real ID, but their expiration date on their current license is after October of 2020. And then we made a few other technical corrections and some cleanup language that was recommended by staff.
Further discussion on Senator Pratt's motion. Seeing none, Senator Pratt renews his motion that the foregoing recommendation and Conference Committee report on House File 3 be now adopted and the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference Committee. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion is adopted. To the bill, Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Madam President. Members, as you know, this is an important bill for Minnesotans. This is a bill that's going to allow us to continue to travel using our driver's licenses, but also to enter military bases and other federal buildings. I want to take a moment to thank my Conference Committee conferees, Senator Rest and Senator Newman, for their hard work, and my other co-authors, Senator Jensen and Senator Schoen. I think we have a good bill here. This is something Minnesotans expect us to get done, and I'm looking for everyone to vote green tonight. Please vote green.
Further discussion, Senator Rest.
Thank you, Madam President. And I too would urge people to vote for this bill. This is, in my mind, the best of bipartisanship. And I appreciate the leaders in this area over the last couple of years. Certainly Senator Pratt, but also Senator Torres-Ray and Senator Dibble, and I felt really privileged to be part of that team as we dealt with Real ID. This is a Senate bill. This is not a House bill. This is the Senate bill. The bill that left the Senate has some improvements here in the Conference Committee, but the amendments that we offered, Senator Westrum's amendment, and I can't, and who's it? And Coran's amendment, thank you very much. They went on the bill, so we have stayed in the Conference Committee. They took our firearms language, Senator Ingebrigtsen, and they took our separation language with if Real ID is undone at the federal level. We worked together, Senator Newman and Representative Torkelson, on the fee schedule, and the bill remained neutral with regard to extraneous issues. And I think it shows that when the majority party needs a little help from the minority party, that we can come through and get a great bill, and I'm happy to be part of that process. And I thank Senator Pratt and Senator Gazelka for their confidence. Vote green.
Further discussion, Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam President, it's true that the bill is coming back out of Conference Committee is basically the bill that was on the Senate floor here some weeks ago. But I still have concerns about the bill from the very beginning that it was introduced a couple of years ago, maybe. But if you look at some of the remarks that were made by members of the Senate, U.S. Senate, I had passed out to you back in 2005 regarding Real ID when it was passed in 2005. Real ID passed at that time in the middle of the night as an amendment to an Afghanistan war funding bill without any Senate hearings. On the floor of the Senate, U.S. Senator Lamar Alexander warned the Real ID Act would lead to a national ID card, as he mentions in the piece that I had handed out. He mentioned that, and many others, Senator Patty Murray, a Democrat from Washington, Senator Joe Lieberman, independent of Connecticut, and Senator Bill Nelson, a Democrat from Florida. At that time, in 2005, a gentleman by the name of Jay Maxwell helped write the language for the Real ID Act and had been working on this since back in the 1980s. He worked for AMVA at the time, and at the time he had set together some of the points that were needed and the finer points of how this bill would be acting. And then when 2005 came around, they basically adopted the language that he and some of his cohorts had put together. And then in 2005, after it was adopted, or should say, I guess, dropped into a bill in the middle of the night, he, along with several of his cohorts from AMVA, formed their own company called Claris Solutions. And Claris Solutions basically was made up of senior system engineering people from AMVA, other people who are senior members from the group called AMVA, members who had been there for 15, 17, 20 plus years, who wrote this language. And then after the language had been adopted, or this bill had been adopted with this language in it, the government went out, the federal government went out to Claris Solutions and basically set up a working relationship with Jay Maxwell to have his language and have Claris Solutions be the ones who implemented the Real ID for across this state. And what's troubling to me is that we're allowing somebody who had plans to do all this in prior knowledge of what may happen to see this come forward, and now it is up to the states to have to come up with the money to fund this thing and to keep it funded from now until eternity, or whenever this thing is finally stopped. In some of the urging by other states, Missouri and some other states, they have written to the administration asking that the Real ID language be stopped and put aside so that we aren't put in a situation where we're forced to have to follow this and have to pay extra money from the state coffers, when actually it's the federal government that should be giving us money to take care of this whole situation itself.
Excuse me for a moment, Senator Anderson. It's very loud in here, and I believe it's the extraneous conversations in the back and on the side, and someone's watching a video. It's very difficult to hear, so please, if we can take the conversations either outside or keep them quiet. It was very difficult, starting to get very difficult. Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam President, appreciate that. And members, I just wanted to say as a final, read the final statement made by Senator Bill Nelson, a Democrat from Florida. He says, I do want to express my concerns about this so-called Real ID part that was put in the bill in the dead of night without notification that was promised to the minority, without the informing of the various senators that this was going to be part of the conference committee. The concern that I have is that we're going to have an invasion of people's privacy without having careful consideration through committee hearings and through full debate of the issue on something that is as important as driver's licenses to so many Americans, that we're going to start on the road of invasion of privacy. And if we give the information to the Department of Homeland Security, what prevents them from going along and allowing this to expand to health care access, to purchases of other things that we now prohibit to young people? How many people will be required to have the Real ID for federal purposes? And who will that next be forced to get a real ID card? We have the enhanced driver's license here in Minnesota. It's already available for people, and for people who have to travel overseas, you still have to have a passport. Members, I appreciate your willingness to listen and to hear my concerns and to read the information on there, and I'll stand for questions if there are any.
Senator Jensen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Senator Rest, for your comments. I suppose there's just a few bills that a freshman senator will remember for years and years to come, but I will remember this bill, and it's a learning experience for me. I've had a chance to watch the process, and while at times it has been embedded with sophistry and confusion and partisanship, at the end of the day, I think bipartisan forces have contributed to give this a shape that makes me very pleased to vote for it. So thank you.
Further discussion on House File 3. Senator Ralph.
Thank you, Madam President. I too rise in support of this bill. I have some serious concerns about it, but I think that through the process, which involved the committees and the various testimony and the changes that have been made, very carefully thought through, have at least provided us some measure of solace in terms of the data privacy and the possible overreach of the federal government. The flip side of this is, as I said, I believe before on this floor, I am unwilling to play chicken with my constituents as the driver of the car and the government in the other vehicle. We have many people. I just received a phone call from a local businessman in St. Cloud who travels consistently and has clients that travel with him that could be imperiled if we do not pass this bill. So I support the bill as it is now before us. It does provide some protections, and I believe we should go forward with this, and then as we move forward, seek to tighten the privacy protections at the federal level. Thank you.
Senator Newman.
Madam President, I just wanted to rise in support of this bill. It's a bill on which I am a co-author. I was also on the conference committee. It's a bill that went through the Transportation Committee. And I will tell you that over the last year or so, I have had constituents on both sides of this particular issue. I have had those who, for all of the reasons that Senator Limmer and Senator Anderson are opposed to the bill, they are equally in agreement. However, I also have constituents that fully favor the idea of being able to have a real ID. They want to be able to, from the standpoint of military families, they want to be able to get onto a military base, into federal buildings. They want to be able to get onto their commercial flights and absolutely support the notion of being able to get a real ID. Ultimately, I agreed to support this bill because of the two-track system, and for those, frankly, like myself, I have no intention of getting a real ID. I have a passport, and my regular driver's license is going to be just fine with me. But there are constituents that we have that really do want the option to get the real ID, and it's up to them. And if they decide they want it, they will now have that ability. And so I truly do feel that I have completed my promise to my constituents in supporting this dual-track real ID bill. Thank you, Madam President.
Secretary will give House File 3 its third reading.
House File Number 3, a bill for an act relating to transportation, authorizing and governing implementation and requirements of the Federal Real ID Act.
Third reading. Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Madam President. Would the author yield for a question?
Senator Pratt will yield. Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Madam President. Senator Pratt, I may have missed it, but did you review the cost of what Real ID will the taxpayers in Minnesota incur when we go down this route?
Senator Pratt.
Senator Limmer, the Implementation cost will be $3.27 million.
Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm glad we talked about that. There were some estimates that it would be considerably higher. There might even be some dispute over the number, but nevertheless, I think Senator Anderson brought up a good point. Kind of reminds me of the Jesse Ventura days. One of the mottos of Jesse Ventura was, follow the money. And Senator Anderson, I don't know if anyone was listening at the time, he was giving a chronological order of who actually did benefit. A particular vendor and founder of an organization that created the contracts with the federal government that we now are all bending a knee for. And quite honestly, I don't know how much Mr. Maxwell really is going to be making out of this, but it's kind of odd to me that a single person who's managed to influence Congress not only to pass the Real ID bill, but also to benefit as the primary vendor of the contract, how much commission he may make on, let's say, 300 million Real ID cards. If he even made a dime off each one, it's probably enough to retire pretty early. But nevertheless, this issue isn't just about profiteering by a very small group of people or maybe even one person. It really is subjecting our state to the federal government. And the argument has not been changed. The facts will remain that the Homeland Security Director is going to be the one deciding whether they can expand or change the qualifications for the Real ID card in the future. The decisions of the state will now be negated. I hope everybody remembers that. If they haven't heard that discussion before, and all of the times we've discussed this bill, I hope your eyes and ears are wide open on the direction that this state is going. To subject ourselves to a requirement by the federal government when it's not in their enumerated powers is simply wrong. And giving the authority to a politically appointed bureaucrat is even more wrong, because Congress gave that authority to the Homeland Security Director, whoever that director may be in the future. You may have questions of whether or not that person is a virtuous person today, and you won't know how virtuous the next one will be. So keeping that in mind, I hope everyone is fully informed on the issue. I know I've tried to expand the discussion as many times as I've had in the last 9 years when the state of Minnesota was united with 32 other states saying a simple no thank you to the federal government. Since that time, the federal government has quietly gone state to state, threatening every state with airline travel of its citizens if they did not fully comply. This is becoming a new chapter in American history, and quite honestly, I think we're going to regret it.
Further discussion on House File 3. Secretary will take the roll on House File 3. All those senators having voted who desire to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 57 ayes and 8 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to.